So we're delighted to have Michael Whedon, who's the Managing Director for EXP2, fantastic business that deals in the research and content development for high street issues. Why do you think shopping has never been so important with the small independent retailer as it would be today?
Well, high streets are critically important. They retain that importance because it's where the independents are. Although we always think about big multiple chains, small businesses have always actually outnumbered big ones by number of shops 2 to 1. That was before the pandemic, and that will be even more marked now. Until the end of the last millennium, I don't know if anyone remember that, but I do, high streets were really the platform for retail, service and hospitality, because we have to remember that what high streets have is that great richness of all the things you can do. High streets, generally being town centres, have always been very good at that because they've also had culture, they've had local government, they've had all sorts of things, a very rich mix, and they retain that. It's unchallenged, and it's important that we continue with that. So that platform for all of those things remains important. Multiples as well, pre-pandemic, but certainly more marked during it, have been pulling out of high streets. So that bias towards the number of independents has become more important. And there's an important thread of feeling that you'll come across everywhere. It's a great place to pick it up is on social media, that high streets, being those centres with all of those things in them, are important to our communities as well.
Absolutely, and I would imagine community has never been more important than it has been. What's happened over the last 18 months or so.
So yeah, there is a real element to this community thing. People pay a great deal of compliments to it, but there's a core of truth in it, that there's community which you'll find there, which you won't find, for example, in a supermarket.
Supermarkets, I guess, have become quite a sterile environment, and the individuality that you'll see in an independent retailer has been diluted to a great extent.
Well, supermarkets are machines. They're financial machines. They're absolutely enormous. 9 of them dominate UK food retail. But what you do get in an independent, because most independents might on average have just one branch. I think there's only 1 in 5 independents have more than one. So very often the person you're talking to is the one who owns it, who may have established it, who goes to bed at night worrying about it, who loves it. And I know, for example, in the area in which I live, most of the businesses I deal with, the people behind the counter or coming out from behind the counter to serve me are the ones running it. They're the ones who really care. These are not machines with 100,000 employees. On average, they have 10 or fewer, and usually that owner is on the shop floor welcoming people in.
What real tangible effects or changes do you think the last 18 months of the COVID pandemic, from a short-term and a long-term perspective, do you think we'll actually see on the high street?
I can tell you a bit about what's happened. Making predictions is dodgy. Even a month before the first lockdown last year, there was very little attention given to this new Chinese virus in government and around it, in other areas I'm involved in as well. So you never actually know what's going to happen in short term, but nevertheless, we all want to know kind of where we're going. It's evident that commuting has been suppressed. You can tell that just by going to the car parks of any major commuter station, and that's certainly true of the town where I live. Whereas they will be full, interestingly, 4 days a week and empty on Fridays. It's empty pretty much 5 days a week now. Travel as a whole has been suppressed as well. And it is reasonable to assume that people are going to be working at least some of the time closer to home. Now that presents an opportunity for local businesses. Footfall, interesting, has fared better in small towns than it has in shopping centres and in cities. London has suffered particularly badly. And in fact, it's performed similarly to retail parks, which tends to have big advantages. You know, they have the free, easy parking right outside the door. And I think quite a lot of people have liked to be able to go to these places because they can go in their little cocoon of their car. But actually, they haven't particularly done better than retail, than these small high streets. And it's really, I think, noticeable and important that Google's reported a sustained increase in searches ending in the words near me, as in butchers near me. That's the kind of query they've been seeing coming in, because very often now, for our information, we go first to our mobile phones and we go first to, frankly, Google. There are other search engines, but I know very few people who make a great deal of use of them. That near me thing tells you a lot about what's at the top of people's heads, where their thinking is. And I think that presents high streets with a major opportunity. There's a very clear signal in that data there. People are expecting to be shopping and doing things locally.
It's interesting talking about Google and obviously e-shopping. We've seen that, certainly from the delivered food perspective, we've seen a huge amount of increase in that, and I think most projections say that that's been pulled forward by 5 years. You know, right now, because of the COVID pandemic, we're where the experts would think we would have been in 5 or 6 years' time, and that's been pulled forward. But you actually think there's an opportunity within that that's pulled that local, that high street retailer that might give them a slight advantage over the large malls.
There's a story that marketing people often tell about how long it takes to change somebody's habit. And it's usually something like 6 weeks, couple of months. I'm losing track of how long we've been in this now, but it's something like 16 months. Certainly well beyond the 6 weeks that it takes to change people's habits. And they've tried things out. You know, people have tried buying from local shops, and maybe we can come on to that later, where they weren't able to do before. They've been able to have deliveries, maybe they weren't able to do before. So I think that we're seeing, you know, the opportunity arises from the fact that people have tried things out because they've had to, and not just the shoppers, it's the retailers who have tried things out as well. Things I would never have expected to see. Internet shopping in this country has simultaneously, since it started in the mid-90s, about 95, Amazon went online here then, it's simultaneously been one of the fastest take-ups in the world and incredibly glacially slow. So by the time we got to the end of 2019, just as this pandemic, which we haven't got a clue about, actually arrived, just under 20% of all retail in this country, and that's 400 billion quid's worth of sales, just under 20% of that was actually from online sales. So it took 25 years. It took a generation to crawl its way from 0% to 20%. Now, over the last year, it's really boomed to, at some points, just above 30%. But even then you think, that's still just above 30%. It's an increase of about half over what it was previously. Over the last couple of months, it's actually dropped back slightly to just under 30%. My guess is it's going to settle somewhere between 25 and 30%. But the interesting thing now is this is not just huge companies getting all of this business. The gain in terms of online sales, which small businesses with shops made and other businesses with shops made in terms of online sales, was more than 5 times as much as it was for pure play online retailers. And we kind of assume that everything we bought online, we have been buying from these, you know, these huge online retailers, whether it's the Amazons, although 60% of everything they sell is actually from small and other businesses, but also the Boohoo's and the ASOS's and so forth. So the gain has actually been to small businesses doing something they haven't done before, and I find that quite exciting. And that opportunity really goes with the opportunity of people changing their behaviour, staying close to home, focusing more locally.
Wherever you go into a major multiple brand, you're going to see pretty much the same format everywhere you go. The local environment has an opportunity to reflect its local community and make the shopping experience more interactive and more personal, which hopefully will pull people into their shop.
I mean, we have to remember that basically we're social animals. We like all that stuff. We like interacting face to face. It's something a lot of us have been missing over the last year. Footfall hasn't risen back to pre-pandemic levels, but every time there's been a release of lockdown, more people have come back to high streets, more people have come back to those small shops. So there's a battle still to be fought there, getting it back to at least the levels we were at previously. But yeah, I mean, we like to talk to people. Interesting, there's something about a physical location, which also, it's strange. I was talking about this the other day. It matches up with something else, which is the difference between a paper newspaper and looking at it on your phone or your iPad or whatever. In a place, you see things and talk about things. You see stuff randomly, which you don't find in those very linear kind of ways we see news or we see e-commerce listings and so forth. You will talk to the person behind the counter and discuss this particular type of meat, that particular type of poultry, which you don't do when you're online. One of the things I found surprising actually is there's been very little use of something which would have been very easy to do. It was exemplified by a company called Hero, which has an app which is an add-in to Shopify, which is that you could talk face to face with someone in a shop and discuss stuff. You could talk and ask your questions about stock. They could bring things to you. The one thing which has surprised me is that given that more than 90% of adults are carrying mobile phones, retailers didn't get into that. I think there's another whole story to be had there, because very often what you really want to do is still have that face-to-face conversation. I mean, actually, I found this with, for example, looking after an elderly relative. We got an Alexa in so we could talk face-to-face. Just that human contact, eye to eye, makes an enormous difference to the richness of the discussion. Now, it didn't work, I think, during the pandemic, as I hope we're coming out of this. It didn't work during that period. But, I think for another day, that's another way in which small businesses might be able to reach out to people in ways which they hadn't done.
So you're attenuating that opportunity for the customer to interact with the expert behind the counter to make recommendations about their purchase rather than a cold electronic version, I guess.
Well, I think the electronic version can actually be warm if it's got people in it, but that's why I'm surprised that more of that hasn't been taken up. But yeah, I mean, we respond to people, and actually, if we're still doing 70% of our shopping, we're still doing that in shops. It tells you it works. I think what we have learned over the last, I'm still getting this number wrong, 16 months or whatever it is that what high streets have done, small businesses have done, butchers and all sorts of others, is they've been able to use these other channels to reach out to their shoppers. So, for example, 30 years ago, nobody will remember 30 years ago, but 30 years ago, there was only really one option apart from mail order, which was to go to a shop. Now, a small shop can reach out beyond its front door, and it can do so straight into people's pockets with their mobile phones. Now, whether it does it with e-commerce, whether it does it on platforms such as local shopping platforms, or whether, for example, it does simply, and I've seen great use made of this through social media, it can reach out in ways it couldn't do previously. I've been of the opinion for quite a long time that actually what you might be seeing with IT and communications brought into retailing is actually potentially the end of big capital in retail. Now that sounds odd if you think about it, but people are at the moment buying whole supermarket chains such as Morrison's for very small amounts of money, and certainly less than their turnover by a long way. In fact, they're all worth less than their annual turnover. It's quite astonishing, but they have all had to invest enormously. So Morrison, for example, own very large numbers of its properties. They've had to invest hugely in doing this. But actually, a small business can reach out into their area or a region, or if they wish, and they're not forced to do this, nationally, in ways which 25 years ago, they simply couldn't do. Now they have those options. And although they're not free, and although they take work to do, they are available. And I think a lot of retailers have kind of cottoned on to that. Many of them over the last year because they've had to. It's been survival for many of them. But, necessity being the mother of invention, I've seen small shops 240 years old. Lots of butchers are very old. I never quite understand that. Is that because they're family businesses? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Setting up websites for the first time, and putting the little A4 sign in the window, you know, the lingua franca of marketing around the world, even now, saying shop with us online and giving a website address. And I've seen a lot of delivery going on as well. It was the one way, realistically, that I could interact with those retailers. So those options really are still there for those businesses.
So with all that in mind, Michael, how do you think that campaigns like Help the High Street can really help the high street in the future?
Well, campaigns can help high street businesses of all types, including butchers, project themselves into the attention of shoppers. One of the things about individual small businesses is that they're time poor, whether or not they're cash poor. I'm absolutely, all of my experience, which is 30 odd years, in fact, I was born over the shop my dad ran, but 30 odd years working for publishers and trade associations and so forth with independents, is that above all, they're time poor. And they struggle with all these things to market themselves, to project themselves. So campaigns can remind customers of their existence. Although all retailers, it seems to me, believe that everyone knows who they are and where they are, it's actually out of sight, out of mind. It is important to remind them. A campaign can articulate and exemplify all the strengths and the values that we talked about. I have to say, the one thing I wouldn't do, and Help the High Street isn't doing, but others have done, is to kind of guilt trip shoppers with a use it or lose it argument. It just associates these businesses and the high street with negative feelings such as guilt. And I think that's a really bad idea. There are very many positives to promote and support. And that's the best way to help the high street, or that Help the High Street can help the high street. We're an inflection point, I think, with the way people use their high streets and town centres, which we didn't have even 18 months ago. There's a big opportunity here for the high street, and I think Help the High Street can help them take that opportunity and really make the most of it.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for your time today and your expertise. It's been really fascinating talking to you, and I hope we see you again soon here on Weddell TV.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, please ask me back. I'd love to come.